Hey guys, it's 8 Deadly Sin again with another champ select analysis for the first day of the European LCS. This was probably my most favorite game of the entire day just because of the high level of macro interaction with the two strats, as well as I think some very interesting things I can say about this champ select alone. I do plan on making a VOD review of this game, or maybe even a slightly reduced video on reviewing the macro level implications of various actions that occurred in this game. If you have watched this game, such as I have, you know that this was a pretty crazy game, seeing how VT is so much a favored hype team, while Roccat has been pretty much reduced to a former shell of its old self. Now, let's get straight into this champ select and leave that for that other video. So, the first ban coming out from Vitality on the blue side is going to be Kindred. Again, very safe first ban. If you're not going to pick Kindred, you pretty much have to ban it away because its ability with its ult, it pretty much puts a pause on any team fight to create a great utility option, allowing for anyone in that area to become invulnerable and then be simply bursted down and eliminated at the end of that, as well as the massive amount of AD damage coming out from Kindred, especially with the jumps and that kind of AoE effect of being able to hit multiple targets with that ability, as well as the AD scaling and clear time that comes with the passive that happens with Kindred being able to scale that AD into the late game. Overall, a top tier pick that pretty much necessitates a ban if you're not taking it. Now, let's go to the second ban. Now, the second ban and first ban for Roccat from the red side is going to be Fiora. Fiora has already shown herself to continue that high top lane dominance that we saw her happen at Worlds. So, even with the slight nerf to the Juggernauts coming in, Fiora remains still very good. Has the true damage from her passive, has the ability to engage heavy, burst out certain champions in the top lane, win those duels. Also, the ultimate provides a nice zone of healing if you get that kill or eliminate or get all those procs off right away, also providing a huge amount of true damage. Pretty much a great team fight and engage, very good at bursting down. Definitely not going on the tanky side, but the damage cannot be ignored, especially when you have a top laner such as Cabochard who could be picking that up. A good safe ban coming from Roccat from the red side. Now, the next ban in the game coming from Vitality is going to be Tahm Kench. Finally, someone has banned Tahm Kench. It is pretty much very good this patch in the sense that it becomes unkillable in the top lane, has great mobility combined with TP and his ult, and then the ability to not only set up engages and ganks and such with his Devour, and also deal massive amount of damage in trading in lane with that ability, but his ability to save the carries of your team from damage through the Devour and the extra mobility that it applies. Just a very good champion, very good flex pick in this patch. Definitely needs to be banned out. We've seen it used pretty much all day or banned, even in the LCK. Very popular, a solid ban coming out from Vitality. Now, moving to the next ban is coming up from Roccat, another pretty much guaranteed red side ban, the Gangplank. You cannot leave the Gangplank up. It necessitates the first pick if you're on blue side. You're dumb if you don't. It's so much damage, so much AoE damage, a lot of physical damage. Those barrels are insane for wave clear damage in the work, as well as just the global effect of his ult being able to protect against certain dives and engages, as well as providing slows and setting up kills. So both an offensive and defensive capabilities of his global, as well as just the pure amount of damage that he deals, makes him necessitates him as a ban. He's been 100% banned the first day of the European LCS, as we've seen, and this is the last game, and he continues to be so for good reason. Moving on to the next ban coming out from Vitality, their final ban is going to be the Lissandra, another really strong flex pick that we've been seeing emerge on 6.1, commonly banned out, just a massive amount of AoE magic damage, the CC that she provides with all her abilities, the point click of being able to nuke a target or going on herself to kind of create a lot of zone pressure coming out from those area of effect abilities, and her ulti being so insane, a very good point and click on any carry to blow them up really fast, as well as the tankiness that she gets with Roa and the scaling and damage she gets into the late game with those items really makes her a strong threat that really either needs to be picked or banned, but could be ignored. Not necessarily the strongest pick, but seeing how Fiora has also been banned out, Lissandra is that same tier of ban. If they don't want Cabochard to take it, they shouldn't ban it out. Also, the reason that they shouldn't ban Lulu at this point, if you're thinking Lulu is still a top tier pick, is probably because they're on blue side, and they can first pick that as they do, but we'll get into that when we get to the pick sides of the analysis. Now going on to the final ban, and final ban for Rocket, it's going to be the Olaf. This really surprises me. I guess they're really afraid of the pocket pick for the Olaf. Sure, Gamsu did work on it in the Fnatic game, but Olaf itself isn't necessarily the top tier pick that you need to ban out. I really don't see Olaf eliminating or really destroying any certain type of team comps unless you're kind of going for blue build Ezreal. But if you're going to leave champions like Lulu open, there has to be a really good reason to leave Olaf open, and I really think that's a flaw in the banning side of Rocket's phase so far, in the fact that they probably could have banned Lulu, and I think that's a way stronger pick in this meta on this patch than Olaf. I think you can work around the Olaf. I think Lulu provides much more utility and damage rather than the Olaf, which has been banned out. But now that leads us into picks, and as I just gave you why you should have banned Lulu, Vitality picks up Lulu right away. Now this Lulu is going to be going mid to Nuke Duck, and everyone's been praising Nuke Duck as going to be this amazing mid laner, and Lulu is something you definitely could show that on, especially now. Lulu, even in the as she's been taking mid lane, does decent amount of damage, but always wasn't the best. But now with Thunderlords, it just provides her extra burst on her Whimsy auto attacks that pretty much guarantee you a Thunderlord's proc, guarantee you that extra burst of damage, really making her a kill threat in the mid lane, but also providing a lot of, CC and the buffing effect with her over her ult and her shields and speed boost that she can provide, really pretty much makes it any viable strategy to buff any member that is in danger of dying on this team. One thing to note is she isn't that tanky, and we'll get into that when we analyze the team comps as a whole. Moving on to the second pick phase coming out from Rocket, which is going to be their first picks of the game, is coming with the Corki and Rek'Sai. Now, Corki I really like because I would rank it as one of the top two ADCs out on 6.1, the other being Lucian. I think Corki is honestly better than Lucian just because of the utility and the pressure that the package applies with the increased movement speed and then the long range that you can essentially pretty much get a kill every time you pick up the package if you know how to play Corki and you know what you're doing and you have that synergy with other members on your team. So I think it's just a lot more map pressure with Corki. It has a lot of poke damage, a lot of magic poke damage that comes out, so it fulfills any other poke role that, like, say, an Ezreal or something would fulfill, as well as the mixed damage factor, so you're going to have to itemize a bit differently against Corki, and he has this slight true damage on his passive, not a big deal, but I think he just does a massive amount of damage, really good this patch, probably in my top two ADCs, very good first pickup, definitely necessitates that pick if they want to confirm that for their team comp. The next pick is going to be the Rek'Sai. I think Rek'Sai is another top tier jungler, a very zone controlled jungler, instead of an Elise that has the ability to necessarily create those long range picks with Cocoon and Repel. I think the tunnel gives Rek'Sai enough ability to create gank paths for herself through the Fog of War, since there are less green wards due to the preseason vision patches, allowing better ganks to come out from Rek'Sai, as well as the CC area of effect knockup of the unburrow, as well as the potential for flash unburrow, but also the general mobility, meaning that Rek'Sai can travel to any of the tunnels that she has around the map, creating a very much more global presence of Rek'Sai. The ability to go from one side of the map to the other side of the map instantly really provides a lot of pressure that other junglers such as Elise couldn't do. And as for a first pick blind into the jungle, I think it's a very good pick, very viable. The next picking phase, the third one, coming out for Vitality, is going to be picking up their jungle and support. So I really am confused at why you would pick your support at this time, especially it being Thresh, because I feel as though I don't think Edward's necessarily going to have a real priority on Thresh. And also, Thresh really doesn't do anything with what they have set up so far. If you already have a nice protection coming out from the Lulu, the real disengage factors of Thresh aren't good enough, and the engage factors of Thresh aren't really that good either. The hook is like probably the best engage that Thresh has, but I feel like other supports such as Alistar have just as good at engage, Poppy just as good at engage, and probably better in close quarters and has that more ham factor and tankiness factor than Thresh. And the disengage of the Lantern really isn't that big of a factor, seeing how they've drafted so far. Maybe they think they need it for the future, but I'll analyze how Thresh fits into their greater picture when we get to the end of the video. Now, looking at the jungle pick, again, tier 1 jungler, Elise, especially with Kindred eliminated, I think that this is a decent pickup. It provides a bit more damage than, say, a Zac, but and also provides a lot more. I wouldn't say provide. It provides a more gank ability than the Rek'Sai, with the ability to repel Cocoon into lane, have that immense range on the Cocoon, and provide ability to get some picks as well as do some nice percentage health damage with and magic damage with the Spider and the Q coming out from I almost wanted to say Lissandra there now coming out from Elise, but if it was me personally, I would have picked up the Zac. I think Zac gives you more of a tank factor, as seen they haven't drafted any super tanky people yet. And instead of the Thresh, I would have picked up maybe like a Braum instead, just because it provides a little more tank and gives you just as much disengage and engage tools as a Thresh. I think that just would have been better, as well as being able to block some of that Corki poke. I think that would have been a very much like a better choice. And I think the Zac is crucial. Zac is so good. I think it even provides more gank ability in the sense that he has way more gank paths that he can take, since there is less vision with the elimination of green wards and the insane range of his slingshot ability. I think he's probably the strongest jungler out there. I think he is in a tier above Rek'Sai and Elise, even though while they are all really good, I almost wanted to say Edward there because he's eventually going to draft Zac at the end of the drafting phase, but I think Zac would have been the perfect takeaway as a jungler and really provides the tankiness that Vitality is missing so far in their draft. Now, moving on to the fourth drafting phase, we're going to have Roccat pick up Ryze and Taric. Now, everyone wants to talk about the Taric. Even some of the casters were kind of shitting on Taric as like a really bad pick, and it kind of is, but kind of isn't, depending on how you view it. And I'll get into those details when we kind of get to the later end of the video when I analyze the teams. But the Ryze pickup, honestly, I was not surprised that Ryze got through the ban phase. It seems that Europe is very loose with its non-Ryze bans, meaning that either they don't view it as much of a threat, or they kind of know that no one really has shown like a certain level of adeptness at playing Ryze, meaning that it hasn't been too much of a threat. It hasn't really been that much, have that much influence on any of the games that it's been in so far, even though it's been on many since it hasn't been a priority ban. I think obviously at this point the flexibility of Ryze kind of is eliminated in the fact that it's pretty much going to go mid at this point. We can safely assume, because A, it doesn't really fit Freddy's style of play, even though I'm sure he could play it. But I think like mid Ryze is probably the best position with Ryze, with the shortness of the lane and his ability to get as much farm in a short period of time to be able to accelerate his scaling purposes. All the reasons I'm sure you guys know why Ryze is a late game beast. I'm not just going to sit here and repeat them. Let's talk about everyone's favorite guy, Gems the Taric. Let's go. So Taric, I think, is very, I will say this, surprising. I don't think anyone was coming into this game thinking, well, Edward's going to bring out the classic summer pocket pick of Taric into this match, and it's really going to do work. Now, Taric itself really is pretty bad when you analyze the kit from this kind of really detached focus and not actually in-game context. Because you have the stun, which has a fixed stun duration, so it really only has one point and click. And you're saying, well, it's good in the sense that it's point and click and can't be dodged out, but that's only really matters against a Callista, who would normally hop and dodge normal skill shots stun base. So there's a bit of engage factor with that. You have the extra armor that you get from Taric's passive and stuff, but that really doesn't matter, seeing how Vitality has drafted a pretty much all magic damage team comp up to this point of Thresh is what they've seen. So I mean, not too much of a factor in providing an extra tankiness to their team members, but his kind of burst of his ult and other abilities really doesn't come too much. He also has a little bit of lane sustain, but I think like there's champions that have better engaged tools, such as an Alistar, which pretty much has everything that Taric has, but essentially just in a different and probably better way out of context. But I'll get into why this Taric is so amazing, especially in that VOD that I'm planning to make on this match and how it pans out. But that's why Taric is a decent choice, because it gives them the lockdown that they can kind of engage, but also the lockdown in the sense if anybody jumps into their team, Taric can instantly stun them and try to burst them down a bit, and just kind of provides a bit of, I want to say anti-engage rather than disengage necessarily. Anti in the sense that anyone who jumps in is instantly going to get stunned, but it's not necessarily going to actually disengage any team fights. It just kind of gives a slight advantage to Roccat in terms of being able to catch people out of position and disengage anyone who does that initial jump into their team. Let's move on to the fifth pick phase, which is going to be the final phase for Vitality Gaming. And you can already probably see the flaws in their draft if you're not blinded by the hype. So we have the ADC being picked up, which is Tristana, which is a bit confusing for me. I'll get into that. And then the last pick being Kennen for Cabochard in the top lane. First, let's go with Kennen. So we all know Kennen's very good with zone control and the ability to CC with his ult and abilities. Has a lot of mobility with his lightning rush, also ranged, so it does kind of provide an advantage if it's, you can trade even if Rise goes top, which probably isn't at this point. You can make that inference right now based on the picks that they have. And also, the thing about Kennen is it's very squishy. So essentially, they've drafted a team with no tanks, and I'll get into those implications. But also, Kennen's AP. Why draft another AP damage source into this team that has primarily AP damage coming out from Elise and Lulu? There's really no reason. I would have much preferred to see a top laner such as even breaking out a Darius, even though it wouldn't have been that effective. The Olaf would have fit beautifully into this team comp, but it was banned out. That is just coincidence rather in poor drafting rather than like Olaf being banned is a really good choice for that. I think you could have pulled out other, top laners in your repertoire, such as even Gnar. I would love to have seen like a Gnar providing at least a source of AD damage while also still having the range factors and kind of zone factors that a Kennen has when you have the Gnar ulti up and such, as well as that CC and damage. There just would have been AD making the Roccat need to itemize a bit differently, providing more sources of damage, and I think, Gnar would have been an overall better pick for Cabochard rather than the Kennen. Now get into this Tristana. Tristana is no longer, I believe, to be a top ADC. Now you might be thinking to yourself, but Tristana can push down the turrets really fast. But ultimately, while she can do that, she doesn't provide anything else in her kit that other top, ADCs really give. Tristana ultimately is still really good in the late game, but as I stated to why Lulu's so good is because they don't get to the late game. Tristana is not as good as because she doesn't get to that late game stage as well because the games are getting shorter and shorter with the new patches and how death timers are working. So the late game Tristana is almost a dying breed, same as like a weak Lulu in the late game. So essentially, each team has a late game carry in the sense of Ryze and Tristana, but by the time Ryze gets that powerful, Tristana is pretty much going to be useless. While they can protect Tristana with the Lulu, it's still not as good. I much rather would have seen a Lucian come out. I think it provides better wave clear, better early game damage, and I think overall would have just been a better pick. And you need to notice, while she can take down turrets fast, guys, remember that turret resists have been changed. So ultimately, if you're going to be doing a three-man push anyways, the change to the resists are going to make you snowball those turret kills faster. And while Tristana may give you extra speed in that, I don't think it's worth the loss of early game pressure because she's fairly weak in the early game, as well as just the kind of wave clear that you have if you've already used her E, and only using her E on minions removes a major source of her damage anyways, so it's really putting them in a really tough position. There isn't a lot of wave clear on this team, but let's get into the final pick. That's Zac for Freddy in the top lane. Like I've been saying, Zac is just an amazing pick for the jungle, but it ends up going top lane, and it's still just as good because it's essentially like having a second jungler. The range on that slingshot is just so insane that it's able to set up multiple gank paths, multiple roaming paths, and multiple like areas of engagement that you can create just by covering a sheer distance that normally isn't going to be warded because of those vision changes. Also, Zac provides an immense amount of tank, which means he's going to be able to frontline for a time. Bounce around is just an amazing ability that's going to allow Corki to get more poke down. It's going to be allow Ryze to get a lot of area of effect down while kind of zoning other people out from necessarily jumping on their backline through the bounce around, and I think is very good. And I think the combination with the gank pass that Rek'Sai can have, even in the top lane, the slingshot is still effective because you can slingshot onto this Kennen for the initial stun, and then by the time that initial stun runs out, Rek'Sai should have already be in a position where she can gank and ultimately knock up Kennen again, and by that time Kennen is most likely dead, and that the you know, the I'm thinking of the word here. Sorry about this, guys. The gap close slash mobility of Kennen from the Lightning Rush is really negated by that double stun that coming from the top jungle synergy. So now let's get into the team comps. Let's start with Roccat. Roccat has a very good engage zone team. And what I mean that is they have zones of engage in the fact that they aren't trying to zone control and necessarily. Actually, let me rephrase that. They are more of the zone control team rather than the engage. While they have engage tools such as the Rexai and the Zac that they can utilize if they want to get ahead in the early game, they're most likely going to have zones of pressure that are going to force Vitality into situations where they can't engage safely or are going to be engaging in a risky stance that can be easily countered, giving the Rise time to ramp up. What I mean by this is you have Edward on Tarek able to stun anybody who dare goes towards the back line. So even though it seems like a bad pick, it provides the utility in the sense that it's going to be able to prevent anybody from reaching the back line who gets through the zones of influence that both Rek'Sai and Zac are going to be providing in the front line. And what I mean by zones of influence is Rek'Sai is going to have the constant, mobility of the tunnels and flash if it is up for knockups onto multiple people, meaning that over walls and such and around walls that are unwarded, Vitality is going to have to be very careful of Rek'Sai burrowing over and causing an engage there. But I think the most zoning pressure comes from the Zac, who ultimately anywhere where you can jump over walls or in range of the slingshot, especially against the walls along the base of Vitality or the walls along Dragon and Baron, are going to be very either need to be warded to prevent the zone, or if they're unwarded and Edward isn't in vision, you're going to be in constant fear of a Zac curdling over those walls and engaging your team and being able to soak up all that damage because they're going to be so tanky. Taric is also tanky enough to absorb a lot of damage for their backline, and the damage from Zac is still pretty decent. So is the damage from Rek'Sai, but the damage from Corki and a scaled up Rise is just going to be able to crush anything in the late game, while also having enough CC and early game tools to be able to survive that mid game slump that they're going to have before the Rise powers up. Now, seeing how that works, let's go to Vitality and what happens here. Now, Vitality has drafted no tanks unless you consider Elise the tank. And regardless if you do or not, Elise is going to be their front line. Thresh is somewhat tanky but very squishy, which is why I would have suggested a Braum, because it provides the same amount of disengage that a Thresh has, provides a lot more zoning and zones of pressure that they can create with the ult and slow with the ult, as well as the ability to stack and stun people, possibly creating more picks than just necessarily a Thresh Flay and our Hook and Flay would do. Also, the Lantern really isn't going to be used here because who are you going to be lanterning out? You're not going to be lanterning out Lulu. You're not going to be lanterning out Tristana because unless she gets caught or something, and you're only really going to be lanterning out the Kennen, who's not going to be tanky enough where it'd be worth to lantern him out because once he blows all his spells and blows his ult, he's pretty much useless at that point. So there's no point to really waste the lantern on him, and because he's not going to be doing an insane amount of damage, and he's probably going to be poked out and completely wrecked in health-wise by the damage that you have on Rocket's side. So Vitality's team is really engage heavy in the sense that they're going to be trying to look for cocoons, hooks, and ability to jump on people with Tristana, Lulu, and Kennen. So they're looking to jump onto Roccat and catch them either out of position or in a position where they can win. The problem is, since they have no tanks in this entire lineup, if they fall behind at any point in the game, they can easily get snowballed by the team of Roccat and the way they have constructed their draft. So Vitality essentially has put its D on the table and has stated to Roccat that we are better than you. We feel we will face crush you, so we've made a lineup that essentially either face crushes or gets face crushed. Having immense faith in that, I think, is a very flawed draft phase and a very flawed gaming philosophy if you're going to have, regardless if they thought it or not, their draft reflects such a such an ideology of thinking that they're going to win, especially being all the hype around Vitality, which eventually is probably why they lose, and you can see why they get snowballed. If we look at Tristana, like, you're going to be pushing down towers, but I've already explained why that doesn't really matter due to the changes in tower defenses, but they have all their eggs in one basket because if it gets to where they cannot end, if Vitality cannot end the game by the time the mid game has ended, they are pretty much for sure going to lose unless they completely outplay because they're going to have no front line to defend against Corky Poke, so they're going to be poked out before the fights are going to even happen. Their disengage is not enough so that it will be able to dissuade a full tank Zac from just jumping into their entire team using his ult and just completely disrupting that, or having the engage from um, Roccat I come in. Taric is going to be able to stop anyone who runs in. If Kennen runs in and tries the ult, instantly Taric stunned, completely stops that. If anyone tries to Tristana jumps in, can be stunned. Rather than an engage tool, it's a lot more defensive, but it's good in the fact that Roccat doesn't need to be necessarily offensive. That's why I describe their team comp as very much a zone control and exerting pressure comp to allow that Ryze to scale up. And then by the time it gets to the late game where Ryze is scaled up, killing the Tristana is going to be easy, where all their late game, damage is put into this Tristana and protect the Tristana comp, whereas she doesn't deal as much damage as Lucian would. Even if it's late game, the range is the only advantage that she has. Even with like rapid fire cannon, I think Lucian is still a better choice in terms of damage and utility of his abilities, but also Ryze is going to be able to crap all over Tristana, especially if she tries to jump in and blow up the Ryze. Taric's going to be right there to disengage. You have the tank in front line of Roccat just being vastly superior. If I had to give credence, seeing how I've already watched the VOD, who I would give the advantage to purely based on the drafts. Ultimately, I would give a flawed advantage because I would probably be biased to Vitality just because of the raw talent and experience that they have on the team. I would make the assumption that they would be able to execute their team comp rather than falter. Now, if you've watched the actual VOD, you can see that Vitality kind of gets their ass handed to them because of exactly all the reasons of how Roccat can win the game that I've explained and all the flaws of the Vitality team comp that I've explained. They just absolutely get face rolled and face crushed, and it really shows you you can have all the hype in the world, but you really need the sound drafting practices to be able to craft a team comp that allows you to win the game. And I think just because they failed to utilize the early and mid game pressure that they could have exerted on such champions, especially with Ryze being very vulnerable in the early game, I think that they've pretty much failed in their execution, and which is why they lose the game. I'll be getting into those macro level and micro level implications when I do that VOD review, but coming out of Champ Select, if you're taking this from a purely non-hype biased mind, the team comp is going for Roccat just purely based on the kits and champions that they've chosen. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. This was probably my favorite match to do, my favorite Champ Select to analyze with such interesting picks and such kind of failings and strengths of team comps that we have here. So I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace, guys. See you tomorrow.